Welcome to Watch Cozy.
Great to be here.
Today we're taking a really fascinating look at the Arabian Peninsula, specifically before Islam arrived in the 7th century. And, forget any simple ideas you might have. We're going to explore 7 key aspects that, well, they reveal a much more complex and lively world than many realize.
That's right. I think often our understanding of this period is, let's say, based on somewhat incomplete information.
Right.
So we really aim to explore some of the more recent historical findings, new interpretations, just to build a richer picture of this really important era.
Okay, sounds good. Let's dive into our first point then. This idea of Jahiliyyah, often called the Age of Ignorance.
Yes.
Traditionally, this time is seen as, well, widespread illiteracy, barbarism, a complete lack of culture. But what are we learning now? Is that accurate?
Well, what's truly interesting is how archaeological discoveries, especially in the last few decades, are really changing this view.
How so?
We're finding numerous stone inscriptions, and not just by kings or elites, but, by ordinary people.
Really? Everyday folks?
Exactly. And this suggests a much higher level of literacy than that old Jahiliyyah narrative would have us believe.
Okay.
It implies a society that valued communication, maybe even created a fertile ground for new ideas to spread quickly, including religious ones, perhaps?
That really flips the script. It's not just about the rulers then, but what ordinary people were actually doing.
Precisely.
And it's not just carvings in stone, is it? We also have that strong tradition of pre-Islamic Arabic poetry and literature.
Absolutely. This wasn't some kind of cultural void. The poetry of the time was highly developed. It dealt with really important social themes like tribal values, honor.
So, complex stuff.
Very. And even later Islamic writings, they refer back to this existing literary tradition, which shows just how significant it was.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting for me. We hear about significant cultural exchange with Sassanid Iran, centered in Al-Hira. This wasn't some isolated desert culture, was it?
Not at all. Look, Al-Hira, which was the Lakamid capital near modern Kufa in Iraq, it was a real hub, an intellectual center.
Okay.
Arabs actually went there to study things like medicine, philosophy.
Yeah.
It shows a clear connection to the wider intellectual world of the time.
And this exchange left its mark, even on the Arabic language itself.
Definitely. The Arabic of that period, it incorporated Pahlavi Persian words, and kind of surprisingly, some of these even appear in the Quran.
No kidding. Like what?
Words like Ferdows or Rosa, they both relate to beautiful gardens or paradise. They're examples of this linguistic and, cultural blending.
So if all this was going on, why this persistent story of Jahiliyyah, of ignorance? What might have led to that perspective sticking around for so long?
That raises a really important question. Some scholars suggest this narrative, it served a purpose.
A purpose.
For early Islam, perhaps it emphasized the new faith as a complete break, a salvation from what was framed as a barbaric past.
Ah, okay. A contrast.
Exactly. And it's also worth considering how later historical interpretations, maybe influenced by different political agendas over the centuries, might have sort of cemented this view.
Food for thought. Okay, let's move to our second key aspect. Religious diversity. We often picture a purely pagan society, worshipping idols.
That's the common image, yeah.
But the reality seems much more varied, doesn't it?
It really does. Recent research points to a far more complex religious scene. Now, idol worship certainly existed, no doubt.
Right.
But it wasn't the only religious expression. We have growing evidence for a significant presence of monotheistic beliefs, too.
Monotheistic? You mean more than just a few isolated individuals here and there?
I do. For instance, archaeological finds have uncovered evidence of at least 12 churches in the peninsula.
12? Wow.
Yeah. And when you compare that to the, frankly, fewer traces we have of large, dedicated pagan temples, a different picture starts to emerge, doesn't it?
It certainly does. That's surprising. And Christianity itself wasn't just one monolithic thing, was it?
No, definitely not. It existed in various forms. Nestorian and Jacobite Christianity, these were distinct branches of early Christianity with different theological takes.
Right.
They were present in the north, partly influenced by the Lakhmids and Ghassanids, who were client states of the Sasanians and Byzantines, respectively.
Okay.
And then in the south, you had the influence of the Aksumite Empire from Ethiopia, and even Jewish rulers at times contributed to a Christian presence.
And even in central areas, like Mecca and Medina.
Yes, even there. We have evidence of Christian communities in those key central places, too.
Fascinating. And alongside Christianity, you mentioned Judaism.
Yes, partly due to historical expulsions from Palestine and Syria over time, Jewish tribes established communities, particularly around Medina, known then as Yathrib, and also down in Yemen. Their presence added another layer, another thread to the religious tapestry.
And we also hear about the Hanif religion. What exactly was that?
Ah, the Hanifs. They're really interesting. These seem to have been individuals who were sort of feeling their way towards monotheism independently.
Independently.
Yeah, often rejecting the prevalent idol worship around them, but without necessarily fully aligning themselves with existing Jewish or Christian doctrines. They represent this kind of independent spiritual quest, often linked back to the figure of Prophet Abraham.
Sort of native monotheism.
In a way, yes. And you also have to factor in the influence, however strong or weak in different areas, of Iranian religions.
Like Zoroastrianism.
Exactly. Zoroastrianism, but also Manichaeism, Mazdaism. These originated in Persia and had some level of influence, particularly in the eastern and southern parts of the peninsula.
So the idea of worshiping a single god, it wasn't entirely alien before Islam arrived.
That's a key point. What's fascinating here is that the concept of a single god, sometimes referred to as Allah, sometimes as Rahman, seems to have existed independently of those established monotheistic religions like Christianity or Judaism.
Iran.
Yes, the term Rahman, meaning the merciful, was used for a high deity, particularly in the south. And interestingly, some Christians even seem to have identified this Rahman with God the Father in their Trinity.
Wow.
It really highlights a pre-existing awareness, or at least a current, of monotheistic ideas circulating in Arabia.
Okay, our third point shifts focus a bit to something very practical. Water. We often imagine Arabia as just endless, hot, dry desert. How did people actually live and thrive there?
It's a good question. Despite the climate and the general lack of permanent rivers, there was a seasonal one in Yemen, but that's about it. Water was, well, absolutely vital, the key to life.
So, wells, underground sources.
Exactly. Wells and underground water sources were essential for survival. Full stop.
And presumably whoever controlled these precious resources held significant power, right?
Precisely. Our sources really highlight the Quraysh tribe's role in Mecca. Their control over water resources, particularly the famous Zamzam well, was a major factor in their growing influence, even before Islam.
Okay, so knowing how vital water was, it makes sense that a place like Mecca, with a reliable source like Zamzam, would become a real focal point.
It does. And Mecca's importance, as you said, predates Islam. It wasn't just about religion initially. Its location on trade routes was also absolutely key.
We'll get more into trade soon, but the water was foundational.
Foundational. The north-south trade routes connecting places like India and Egypt with the Levant, linking into the Silk Road, many passed through or near Mecca. The Zamzam well made it a crucial and importantly a sacred stop for those caravans.
And this complex religious landscape we just talked about existed within this challenging physical environment where survival itself hinged on water.
Exactly. The two were intertwined.
Okay, moving to our fourth aspect. The central role of the tribe. In such a challenging environment, it just makes sense that community would be everything.
Oh, absolutely. Tribal life was indeed essential for survival. It fostered incredibly strong community bonds, a deep sense of commitment, mutual support.
So the tribe wasn't just a social unit, it was more fundamental.
It was the fundamental social and political structure of the peninsula. Everything revolved around it.
So the individual was, what, almost secondary to the needs and survival of the tribe as a whole.
That's a pretty good way to put it, yeah. The tribe had its own strong value system: honor, loyalty, collective responsibility. The group's well-being often outweighed purely individual desires or concerns.
And tribes had their own ways of doing things, politics, traditions.
Definitely. Tribes had their own internal politics, their own customs, traditions, even their own ways of resolving disputes, sometimes involving respected judges or arbiters within the tribal system.
And the head of the tribe, the sheik?
Yes, the tribal leader, the sheik, held considerable authority and privileges. And this tribal structure wasn't just some ancient relic. It remained a crucial aspect of Arabian social and political life for centuries, even well after the rise of Islam.
Right, its influence lingered. Okay, fifth aspect, something that might seem surprising given the desert landscape flourishing trade networks.
Yeah, it might seem counterintuitive, but trade, both within the peninsula and with external regions like Persia, Byzantium, India, Africa, had a very long history.
But it really picked up before Islam.
It did. What's particularly interesting is the significant growth of trade in the centuries, and especially the decades, leading up to the 7th century.
We hear about Iranians trading by sea, for example, in places like Bahrain and Oman, so maritime connections were important too.
Absolutely. The Persian Gulf was a major artery. And importantly, something else was happening further north.
What was that?
The escalating wars between the two superpowers of the day, the Byzantine Empire and the Sasanian Persian Empire.
Okay.
These conflicts often disrupted the traditional northern land trade routes, the ones going through Mesopotamia and Syria.
So conflict in one part of the world had this ripple effect, boosting the fortunes of Arabia.
Exactly right. That disruption actually increased the importance of the routes running north-south through the Hijaz region of western Arabia.
A safer route, maybe?
Likely safer, yes. And oases like Mecca became increasingly vital as secure, convenient stopping points for caravans. This naturally led to more trade activity flowing through them.
So Mecca, despite not really having agriculture to speak of, it thrived purely as a hub for trade and, well, camel transport.
Precisely. It became a keynote. Trade routes linked Yemen in the south, famous for incense, all the way up to the Levant, connecting into Mediterranean trade and, as we mentioned, the Silk Road networks, and all passing through or near Mecca.
And the Quraysh tribe, who we mentioned, controlled the water.
They played a absolutely crucial role in facilitating and, importantly, protecting this trade. This became a major source of their growing power and wealth.
Which leads us very nicely into our sixth point, the rise of Mecca itself, and specifically the Quraysh tribe. It wasn't just luck, was it, that this particular tribe in this city became so influential?
No, not just luck. Mecca's pre-Islamic significance, as we said, due to its trade location and the sacred Zamzam well, and also the Kaaba shrine, which was sacred before Islam too.
Right, that provided the foundation.
It did. Then along came a key figure, Qazai. He was a fifth ancestor of the Prophet Muhammad, and he's credited with consolidating the Quraysh tribe's power in Mecca, actually settling the various clans right around the Kaaba.
So a very strategic move, positioning themselves literally at the center of this already important place.
Absolutely. And by managing the pilgrimage rites associated with the Kaaba, controlling that vital water supply from Zamzam, and crucially establishing a level of security in and around the city.
They made it attractive for trade.
Exactly. The Quraysh essentially created an environment where trade could thrive. And this, in turn, further boosted their own prominence and wealth.
And figures like Hashim, another ancestor of the Prophet, played a role in expanding these connections.
Yes, Hashim is particularly noted for establishing agreements, sort of peace pacts or trade deals with powers like the Byzantine Empire and also with various other tribes along the trade routes.
Diplomacy was key then, not just location.
Very much so. These agreements ensured the safe passage of Meccan caravans, which was absolutely essential for long-distance profitable trade. You connect this back to the flourishing trade networks we just discussed.
That makes perfect sense how a hub like Mecca, under leaders like Hashim, really took off.
Right. And this increased trade, connecting them with regions like Iraq, Abyssinia, Ethiopia, Yemen. It led to new alliances, access to diverse markets, and it gradually began to transform Meccan society itself.
How so?
Well, for one thing, we even see a subtle shift in their approach to conflict. The Quraysh seem to have increasingly favored negotiation, maybe accepting ransom or blood money, over the traditional cycle of revenge killings.
Why? To protect trade.
Very likely. Constant feuding is bad for business and security. Stability was becoming more valuable.
And this prosperity under Quraysh leadership must have led to significant social changes within Mecca.
It certainly did. As Mecca flourished, you see growing social stratification, bigger gaps between rich and poor. And this necessitated the development of new social rules, new ways of managing this growing, more complex, more urban kind of center.
Okay, our final key aspect, number 7, brings us to a crucial point, a shift in perspective in how we understand all this today. It sounds like our view of pre-Islamic Arabia has changed quite significantly, quite recently.
That's a really key takeaway from all this, I think.
Yeah.
Yes, research in, say, the last 20 to 25 years has dramatically altered our understanding.
That's what I mean.
It's a combination of things, new archaeological discoveries, definitely.
Yeah.
But also a fresh look, a reevaluation of existing historical texts and inscriptions with new questions in mind.
And the result?
The result is that the old picture, that sort of monolithic image of a single, ignorant, isolated society, it's just being replaced.
Replaced with what?
With a picture of much greater diversity, cultural, religious, more evidence of lively cultural exchange, interaction with neighbors, and these evolving social and political structures we've been discussing.
It's almost like we're uncovering a whole lost chapter of history, or at least seeing it much more clearly.
In many ways, yes.
And it wasn't just about peaceful exchange or internal development, was it? We even hear about a significant military event involving Arab tribes before Islam.
That's right, the Battle of Dukar. It likely happened in the early 7th century, so just before or around the very beginning of the Prophet Muhammad's mission.
And what happened?
It's fascinating. In this battle, a coalition of Arab tribes actually achieved a victory against the Sassanid Persian army.
A victory against the Persians.
Yes, and this directly challenges that long-held notion of Arab tribes being weak, disorganized, and sort of insignificant on the regional stage before Islam came and united them.
That's a major revision.
It is. It shows they were capable of coordinated action and could hold their own even against a superpower before the advent of Islam.
So wrapping this all up, the Arabia before Islam was, well, far from a blank slate, far from a simple story of ignorance.
Not at all. It was a vibrant peninsula. Diverse cultures, diverse religions coexisting, complex strategic trade networks, evolving power dynamics, especially around places like Mecca and tribes like the Quraysh.
And considering this more accurate, more complex picture, it really makes you think, doesn't it?
It does. How does this different context change how we see the rise of Islam itself and its incredibly rapid early spread? What does it tell us about how interconnected these ancient civilizations actually were?
Yeah.
These are the kinds of big questions this newer understanding really opens up for us.
Absolutely. This has really shown me, and hopefully you listening, just how much more there is to this period than I ever realized. Makes you wonder, doesn't it, about other times or places in history where our understanding might be based on incomplete narratives, just waiting for new discoveries or perspectives. Definitely something to keep in mind.